She didn't want luxury. She just wanted a future where she wouldn't be treated like a secret. In the halls of the mansion, he silently swore his love to her, far from the eyes of the elite. He told her she was different, that she was the one he dreamed of running away with. She believed him, even when the wedding invitations were printed with another name, even when his mother ignored her, even when he asked her not to appear in the photos. On the day of the ceremony, her cell phone went silent. No messages, no words, just silence. And then on television she saw him, smiling next to the heiress of the construction company. She fell to her knees but didn't cry, because she knew time would take care of her. She never appeared again. She disappeared from the map as if she had evaporated. At work they pretended she never existed. In the newspapers, only the new couple's brilliance was printed in the society columns, but his eyes never smiled. Even with the rich woman by his side, he always seemed to be searching for something in the void. Years passed, and when he least expected it, he needed someone with the courage, intelligence, and heart that he had once thrown away. It was then that the truth began to return, not as a scandal, nor as declared revenge, but as a slow, silent, and relentless blow. The kind of answer that only destiny is capable of delivering when pain chooses the right time to blossom. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. On the morning when everything seemed to be falling apart, she still believed in love. She was sitting in the corner of the small back room, wearing a simple blouse, her hair tied up carefully as she had done in the days when she waited for him. Her hands were shaking a little, but her eyes had that glow that only exists in those who dream of the impossible. Outside, the guests for the ceremony were already arriving at the Thornton mansion. Luxury cars were parking on the main avenue. Security guards were organizing the path to the altar, decorated with white and gold flowers, and the press cameras were getting ready to record the wedding of the year. But inside, between walls that had heard forbidden whispers and unspoken promises, she waited. She waited for him to appear, to do what he had promised, to say, "Come with me," before it was too late, because he had sworn. Not with exact words, but with eyes that begged for freedom, with kisses given in a hurry behind the service stairs, with notes written on napkins and hidden in the laundry closet. He said she was different, that he had never loved like this, that he just needed to wait for the right moment. That morning her cell phone rang at 7, as usual, a simple message. "Trust me." After that, silence. She got ready, grabbed the small backpack she had been packing for days, and hid the heart between her fingers. She couldn't show herself in the garden, of course. She wasn't welcome there. She was the cleaning lady's daughter, promoted to kitchen maid because of her discretion and silence. She was pretty, yes, but invisible. And yet, he said that she was the one he wanted to run away with, that he hated that arranged marriage with the Holbrook family's daughter, that his name was only at stake because it was what the construction company needed. And she, even knowing everything, believed him. Because when you love with a clean chest, it's hard to imagine the other person loving dirty. Hours passed, and her phone remained silent. The evening dress she had rented with great effort was still inside her bag. The driver who had promised to help her never showed up, and when she looked out the window, she saw him, in a tuxedo, smiling, the bride beside her with a shiny veil, and the band playing in the background, the same melody that months before he had sung for her on the piano in the empty room. Her heart broke silently, without scandal, without tears in front of anyone. She got up, took the hairpins out of her hair, put her cell phone in her bag, and left. No one saw, no one noticed. But there, in that noiseless escape, something began that no one would be able to predict. Because time takes its toll, and love, when scorned, finds ways to blossom where it is least expected. She arrived at the mansion as a teenager, wearing a uniform ironed by her mother, and a curious look that hid her insecurity. She was just one of the many employees in the house, trained to clean without being seen, serve without being reminded, obey without asking. Her mother had worked there for years, respected but always on the sidelines. She knew where to step, what to avoid, who never to speak directly to, and one of those people was him, Benjamin Thornton, an only son, heir to the construction company that built the city's skyscrapers, tall, elegant, polite, and untouchable. From an early age, she learned to keep her eyes lowered when he passed by, to discreetly leave any room he entered. But fate has subtle ways of stitching together unlikely encounters, and it all started with a book. She read during her breaks. I sat in the back of the storage room and devoured novels borrowed from the public library. He saw her once, passing by the half-open door. He said nothing. The next day, he left a new copy of Wuthering Heights in the same corner where she usually sat. There was no note, just the book, and a sheet of paper marking the page where the character Kathy said that true love is wild and untamed. She got the message, but she ignored it, or tried to ignore it, because from that moment on, the gestures began. A coffee left near the stairs, a restrained smile as she crossed the hall, a disguised invitation. If you want to watch the piano rehearsal, you can stand in the corner. I won't tell anyone. Their meetings piled up without anyone noticing. She began to make a point of cleaning the music room during the hours he studied sheet music. She left discreet flowers on the windowsill, and he reciprocated. He began to ask her about her dreams, about the books she read, about why she cried alone sometimes. She didn't answer everything, but she smiled. And that was enough, because there was a similar loneliness in both of them. He, surrounded by gold, but trapped in the image his father wanted. She, born to obey, but with her, heart beating louder than any rule, and there, between silences and stolen glances, an unspoken promise was born. Little by little, he began to look for her at the most unlikely moments. He would wait for the hallway to be empty and walk to the laundry room just to see her folding sheets. He would play the piano in the late afternoons and look at the door waiting for her to appear, and when she didn't come, he would miss the notes. Their world was made of crumbs of time, of courageless words, and of desires suffocated by what surrounded them. But there was something stronger than fear, hope, and she began to dream of the possibility of being more than the cleaning lady's daughter, of being seen, of being chosen. Until one rainy night, while everyone was asleep, he walked into the kitchen and found her sitting there, reading with her bare feet. Without saying anything, he sat next to her. They remained silent for minutes that seemed eternal. Then he said in a low voice, almost whispering, "I wish you were mine." She didn't answer. She just looked at him with teary eyes and smiled. They didn't need words. That moment sealed something that, although fragile, was real. And even if the world outside would never allow it, inside, in that cold mansion, the beginning of a promise was born. What they had built could not be described in public statements. It was a shy, silent passion, made up of small gestures that only they could understand. When he passed her on the service stairs, he let his fingers touch hers quickly, as if the world could not see. When she went into the living room to clean, she would find a note hidden between the keys on the piano. Today, at 6, behind the shed. And she would go. She would always go. Because that was the only place where she could breathe without fear, where love was neither a sin nor a social difference. It was just a feeling. Behind the shed, among old boxes and dusty cars, they exchanged secrets. She told him she dreamed of studying, of being someone beyond the uniform. He said he wanted to disappear from that world of fake parties and programmed smiles. They laughed together. They hugged. But they never crossed certain limits. He said he wanted to do everything right, that she was different, that with her things needed to be special. And she believed. Not only because she wanted to believe, but because she saw in his eyes a desire for change. She saw someone suffocated by obligations, trying to build a space where love was possible. He began to bring her flowers, hidden among the clean sheets. Sometimes he left chocolates in her desk drawer. Other times, he would just show up to listen to her talk. He would sit on the kitchen floor in a suit, while she dried the dishes and told him stories from her childhood. It was a love without luxury, but full of presence. And even if it lasted only a few minutes a day, she kept them as if they were eternal. She even wrote down each note in a notebook, as if she were afraid of forgetting. She wrote down the dates, the phrases, the gestures, as if she knew she was experiencing something that would never last. But there, in that emotional hiding place, they swore to themselves that they would find a way. He said that the arranged marriage was a prison, that his father forced him with blackmail and promises of power, that the construction company depended on that alliance, but that he would resist, that they would run away, that they would leave the city. And when he said this, she forgot the difference in their last names. She forgot that she cleaned the floor while he signed contracts. She forgot that, to the world, she was nothing more than an employee with no history. Because at that moment he was just a man in love, and she a woman who was learning to dream. Sometimes he would draw her on napkins, hastily scribbled faces, eyes marked with blue marker. She collected them like a treasure trove. Once he had written, "If the world doesn't deserve you, I'll run away with you." And even though they were just words, she read them so many times that she memorized them. She began to repeat them to herself before going to sleep, as if they were a prayer, because their love had no place in the Thornton family dining room. It had no place on the altar, but it still existed in the cracks, in the shadows of the mansion. A hidden love, yes, but deeply true. She didn't know it, but from the first day he showed her something. More than kindness, the eyes of the house were already on her. The security cameras, the whispers among the old employees, the ever-watchful gaze of the housekeeper. The mansion had ears, and no gesture between the two went completely unnoticed. Her mother tried to warn her. She said that certain things didn't work, that their world wasn't made for mixing. But she, with a light and naive heart, believed that love could overcome destiny. On the other side of the story, the pressure was different. Benjamin's family watched him as if he were a precious piece about to be polished for business. His father, Mr. Edward Thornton, had not smiled in years, except at meetings with shareholders. He was cold, strategic, and had plans that did not include sentimentality. When he learned, through discreet rumors and employee reports, that his son had been getting close to simple people, as he himself put it, he did not react with outrage. He reacted with silence. A cruel, calculated kind of silence. The same one he used to eliminate risks on the company's board. The Holbrook family's approach was immediate. Invitations to dinners, lavish gifts, veiled promises of capital expansion. Benjamin began to be pushed into meetings with the Holbrook's daughter, an elegant young woman with cold eyes and a resume designed to impress. She knew the game. She knew she didn't need to win his heart. She just needed to win his name. And the Thornton family had already decided. The marriage would be the perfect fusion of two financial strongholds. He resisted. He refused dinners, made up trips, disappeared for hours at a time. He always came back to her saying, "Everything is under control, I promise." But control was slowly slipping from his hands. His father began to threaten to cut off his access. He talked about transferring him to another state, about removing him from the line of succession. His mother, always discreet, began to show up at places where she was, just to look her up and down and leave without saying a word. It was as if the house was slowly turning against her. They changed her shifts. They kept her away from the places where he was. They cut off her direct communication with her superiors. And yet, she continued to believe in him. Benjamin started leaving messages less frequently. His escapades decreased. He was more tense, quieter, but he always said the same thing. "Trust me, I just need you to wait a little longer." She waited, because she could still see. In his eyes, the boy who would sit on the kitchen floor to listen to her talk about books. She still believed that this was real, but what she didn't know was that, behind the apparent delay, there was a strategy in place. His family wanted to eliminate her from history cleanly, without scandal. They were building the perfect trap to keep the illusion alive until it was too late to react. And she, alone in that world of cold walls and red carpets, still held tightly to the notebook of notes and the naive faith that his love would be stronger than any corporate plan. Even though everything around her began to fall apart in silence, She would not let go of the invisible thread that still connected her to him. It was as if each absence was explained with the affection of a memory, as if each absence of a message was filled by an old note that she reread in her room, alone, at dawn. Even when her mother, with her eyes hardened by life, sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Daughter, this is not going to end well," she would just lower her eyes, as if she were listening but not accepting, because inside her, the certainty that he loved her still vibrated, and more than that he would fulfill what he promised. She began to avoid confrontations. He no longer asked when they were going to elope or why the tickets had gone down. He began to answer everything with small smiles, to keep to himself any pain that began to emerge. He wrote letters that he never delivered, writing down the things he wanted to say, that he was scared, that he felt invisible, that he dreamed of waking up on the other side of the city in a small apartment next to him, far from the mansion where love was a sin. But he didn't deliver them, because deep down I still hoped he would say everything first. When he showed up after days of absence, she was cleaning the living room. His eyes were different, darker, heavier, but his touch was the same, delicate, warm, trembling. He took her hand, looked at her silently and said softly, "I need you to trust her a little more. They're going to announce the wedding to her, but it's just a facade. I have a plan." She didn't ask anything. She just nodded, holding back the tears that threatened to overflow. Because there, in that touch, the boy from the piano still lived, the man who had promised to run away with her. And she decided to believe. In the following days, she began to keep her things secret. She put her most important belongings in a discreet backpack, hid the notebook of notes inside a grocery bag, and began to imagine escape routes. She didn't tell anyone, not even her mother. She just wrote down in her mind the times when the house was emptiest, the shortcuts to the back gate, the most discreet taxi drivers who had ever served the family. Because, according to him, when the time came, everything would be very fast. A message, a place, a car waiting, and then freedom. The nights became long. She hardly slept, but her heart beat like someone who was already living in the future. She spent hours on the same kitchen bench where he used to sit. Every now and then, she smiled to herself. It was as if, even in silence, she was living a kind of secret love that didn't need anyone's approval, only theirs. And even when the house was already whispering the name of the new bride, even when the newspapers talked about $1,000,000 rings and wedding invitations, she clung to what they had lived. Because, in her sweet and stubborn innocence, she believed that true love doesn't end like that. That if he loved her, as he said, then everything would work out. And even with everything against her, the silence, the distance, the sudden changes at work, the sideways glances, she kept waiting, with her backpack packed and her heart open. Because sometimes what holds a person back is not what they have, but what they believe will happen. Everything began to revolve around a single moment, the escape. There was no date, there was no guarantee, but there was the promise. And for her that was enough. Benjamin said he was organizing everything, that he had a trusted contact outside the city who could get him away from the company long enough for the dust to settle. He spoke with conviction in a hurry, looking over his shoulder as if every sentence could be heard by someone hidden behind the wall. He said that the wedding to the heiress of the construction company would be just a formal event, a spectacle. "They need appearances, but I don't belong in that world," he repeated. And she, with her heart in suspense, believed him. Every night she mentally reworked the plan. He would send her a message with the name of a simple hotel where she should wait for him, after the official announcement of the engagement. He asked her to stay calm, not to freak out when she saw the news, that everything was necessary to fool her parents, the shareholders, the media. "It will seem like I gave up on you, but it's just part of the game," he said with moist eyes. That night he kissed her like never before, with urgency and desperation, like someone who knows they are about to lose the thing they love most. She went to sleep hugging his coat, which she hid in the back of the closet, and spent the night awake, reliving every word. At work she began to act even more cautiously. The schedules changed again, and she could barely see him. Her mother noticed her distant gaze, her lighter body, and the deeper silence, but she didn't ask. She knew that too many questions could destroy castles made of glass. The notebook of notes was hidden behind the drawer of old spices, along with a yellowed photo of the two of them, taken hidden by the reflection of a window. That was all she would take: the notebook, the photo, the backpack, and the love. Benjamin had promised that after the fake wedding they would disappear for a while, and then come back as a surprise when everyone had already accepted. The idea. He talked about living in a smaller town where no one knew them. He talked about opening a bookstore for her, about letting her study, about writing a new story far from family names and contracts. And she, even with fear whispering in her ears, tried hard not to doubt. Because every time he said, "You are all I really have," the world stopped weighing down. She avoided opening the newspapers, averted her eyes from the televisions on in the mansion's kitchen. I didn't want to see the details of the wedding that had been announced with the Holbrook's daughter. I wanted to believe that it was all part of the plan, that the smiles were fake, that the invitations meant nothing. When she first saw the official bride walking through the house in a white dress, she felt a lump in her throat, but she held it in. She remembered his words. She remembered the touch of their hands, the notes, the meetings behind the shed. He would never lie. Not him. And so time passed. Every day the date set for the ceremony got closer and closer, and she waited. Her cell phone didn't ring, but she told herself it was security, that he would only speak when everything was ready, when the entire city was distracted by the flowers, the columnists, the flashes, and in the middle of all that, the moment when everyone was looking at the bride. It would be time to run away. She had even dreamed about it, the whole city with its eyes glued to the altar, and him, taking a car through the service. Dor coming to pick her up to start over. It was unreal, but it was beautiful, and sometimes it was all she needed to keep breathing. The day arrived without warning, although she knew exactly when it would be. Since early morning, the mansion had been buzzing with voices, hurried heels, flowers arriving in droves, lights being tested. She woke up before the sun, as if something had pushed her body out of bed. She felt a weight on her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was waiting. She picked up her cell phone, as she had done every morning since he had promised. "I'll text you that day." But nothing. No sound, no notification. She still stood up calmly. She put on the clothes she had chosen for that moment, the same ones she would wear to get in the car and leave. Jeans, a clean t-shirt, a light backpack on her shoulder, her hair tied up carefully. She was ready, prepared for the ringing of her cell phone. She knew she couldn't be visible. She needed to be in the back, at the agreed place without raising suspicion. The agreed time. Starting at 10 when everyone is busy with the ceremony. That was all he had said. At 9:32 she was already in the corner of the laundry room, looking through the crack in the door that led to the side parking lot. The luxury cars were starting to arrive. She recognized the faces from the society columns she used to leaf through in the newspapers forgotten in the pantry. Porcelain smiles, cold hugs. The whole city seemed to have been invited. But inside her, everything was silent. Her heart was beating faster by the minute, but there was no panic. There was faith. Her cell phone remained silent. At 10:15, she sat on the floor, in the same place where he usually let her wait. She felt the weight of her backpack on her back and clutched the notebook of notes to her chest. It was all there. The scribbles, the promises, the drawings. She felt like a child waiting for a father who swore he would come back. Because he promised. He swore. He would. At 10:47 she heard the first chords of the song he practiced on the piano when he wanted to think of good things, the same melody he said he had composed after dreaming about her. But at that moment, she heard it playing too loudly, crossing the house like a cruel announcement. Because it wasn't him at the piano, it was a hired professional, and the song she thought was theirs was now part of the official ceremony. At 11:03, the bells rang. She shivered. The phone in her hands was cold. She pressed the call button, unlocked the screen. Nothing. No messages, no calls, no words. Just the background with the blurry photo of a sky they had once observed together from the roof of the warehouse. At 11:27 she got up. She passed through the walls of the laundry room like a ghost, crossed the hallway with her eyes downcast and her steps muffled. She was empty. There was no more hope, no more tears. Only the absolute silence of the cruelest certainty a woman can feel. He would not. "Come." She walked through the back door and down the back road without looking back. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just held her notebook tighter, and for the last time before disappearing from the history of that house, she looked at her cell phone. No message. No word. The plan had been hers alone. She walked to the bus stop with small steps, as if she still carried the weight of a murdered hope. The sun was already beginning to burn her skin, but inside her, everything was cold. She took the cheapest transport she could find, boarded with no specific destination, and sat in the last row. Her head was down, her gaze fixed on nothing, her entire body trying to hide what her heart was screaming inside. At every corner of the city, she felt more distant from him. At every stop, less of herself. She disappeared as if she had never existed in that mansion, as if the tickets had been the result of a delusion, as if the love she believed to be real was just an invention of a foolish and poor girl. Meanwhile, the ceremony went ahead as planned. The society pages were full of photos of the perfect couple. She, the heiress of the Holbrook Construction Company, in a $1 million dress and a calculated smile. He, Benjamin, with his gaze trained to look confident, although there was no sparkle in his eyes. The guests didn't know it, but his absence for days, his sudden disappearance during the preparations, the cancelled phone calls, the discreet crises, all were part of the price. He was there, yes, present, but absent from his own soul. During the reception, the applause rang out, but he could barely hear it. In the crowd, amid the champagne glasses and fake toasts, he searched for a face, hers. As if by some cruel miracle she had appeared there, standing among the waiters, looking into his eyes and asking softly, "Why?" But she wasn't there. She wasn't watching. She wasn't reading the papers. She wasn't crying in front of the television. She was far away, gone. The next day her mother delivered the letter she had left. It was written calmly, firmly, without hate, just one paragraph. "Thank you for making me believe, even if it was a lie. You were the most beautiful part of a story that ended in silence." And nothing more. The news of the maid's disappearance was not published. The family hushed it up. The employees were told not to comment. The housekeeper replaced her name on the roster, and within a week, no one spoke of her again. She was erased from the memory of that house like an inconvenient stain. And yet there were signs everywhere. The silenced piano, the corner of the laundry room that no one entered anymore, the faint perfume that sometimes returned through the hallway without anyone understanding why. Months passed, then years. She didn't come back. No one saw her. No clues, no complaints, no scandals. Just silence. A silence that weighed differently on Benjamin. He kept smiling for the newspapers, signing contracts, erecting buildings with his father's name on them. But deep down, he knew. He knew he had lost something that no amount of money could buy. Something that had perhaps existed only once in a lifetime. Something that disappeared because he didn't have the courage, because he traded true love for a strong name and a lucrative surname, and the woman who loved him was gone with everything he could have been. Benjamin got married, signed documents, posed for photos, and went on a honeymoon with the woman his father had chosen. In Paris, they had their pictures taken in front of the Eiffel Tower. In Venice, they toasted in gondolas decorated for tourists. Everything was impeccable, everything was calculated. She showed off the rings and said, "My husband," at galas, while he smiled with his lips and kept his eyes always lowered, as if he were carrying a name, but had lost his voice. When he returned, the city welcomed them with red carpets. Magazines called them the couple of the year. The company doubled its revenue, and he smiled, because that was what they expected of him. The new routine included dinners with investors, interviews with business magazines, appearances at charities where his wife posed as a model of elegance. At home, The room seemed larger, colder. The mansion renovated for their new life was impeccable, but there was something about it that Benjamin could not touch. He missed the sound of discreet laughter in the kitchen, the smell of the coconut soap she used on. Her hands, the silent gaze that always seemed to understand what he felt without him saying a word. His wife could tell. She knew there was something about Benjamin that didn't belong to her. She didn't ask, but she didn't care either. She played the role of the perfect wife, showed up where she was supposed to, feigned passion in front of the cameras, and slept in separate rooms when the spotlights were off. To her, marriage was a gamble, and he was a trophy. What he felt, or didn't feel, made no difference as long as he was next to her on the covers of magazines. Benjamin tried to forget. He threw himself into work, attended endless meetings, traveled far away whenever he could. But every time he sat down at the piano, his fingers would stop on the same note, the one he missed when she didn't come. He tried to play other songs, other memories, but everything came back to her. And it was always in the silence at the end of the day, when the hallways were dark and the house was finally empty, that he allowed the longing to swallow him up. In his office he kept a small box. Inside was a folded napkin with a drawing of her face, a hastily written note. "If it's still true, meet me behind the shed." He read it in secret, as if trying to revive a part of himself. But time was relentless, and her absence became more and more concrete, more and more irreversible. Sometimes he dreamed about her. He dreamed that she would come back, with her hair down, dressed simply, with that smile. That hurt. In the dreams she said nothing. She just looked at him, and he would wake up with his heart racing, surrounded by silk pillows and walls that meant nothing. Deep down, he knew he had made the wrong choice, not because his wife was bad, but because there was no love. There was only function. And the woman who truly loved him left, taking everything he would never have the courage to hold on to. The years passed as days pass when one lives by obligation, hurriedly, colorlessly, without any weight in time. Benjamin, now the full CEO of Thornton Holbrook Inc., was piling up achievements, titles, and contracts signed with icy handshakes. But behind the mirrored glass of the central building, behind the rooms decorated by renowned designers and the secretaries timing meetings, there was a tired man, an empty man, a man who had already forgotten the sound of his own laughter. The first signs of ruin came not in numbers, but in silences, in the nights when he came home and didn't know which room to sleep in the meetings where he lost the thread of his speech, staring at windows that reminded him of a time when he loved someone who laughed at his bad jokes. His body reacted before his mind, unexpected tachycardia, chronic insomnia, memory lapses, and no one saw it, because he was Benjamin Thornton, the perfect heir, the static husband, the impeccable executive, the man who had everything except peace. His wife now lived her own schedule, always at events, on magazine covers, traveling with friends who had double names and waxen smiles. The two rarely saw each other, and when they did, they didn't touch each other. It was as if their life together were a play with a guaranteed audience, but no soul. He knew that this was the price of the silence he chose, but he only began to feel the real weight of this absence when he saw, for the first time, a young couple reading a book on a bench in the square. The boy was holding her hand tenderly, and the girl was smiling the way she smiled. How she? And there, sitting in the back seat of the armored car, he broke down. The driver didn't look, but he cried silently, like someone who realizes too late what he has lost. One night, he opened an old box of papers in the back of his office. He found her notebook there. Yes, her notebook, the same one she used to write down her notes. Someone had hidden it in the back of a drawer in the pantry years before. No one could explain how it got there, but it was intact. Each page, a memory. Each letter, a pain that came rushing back. He read it all, from the first page to the last, and for the first time, he felt ashamed, not of the betrayal, but of the cowardice, of the way he had allowed everything to be erased to keep a title that in the end was worthless. Her absence was no longer a longing. It was a scar. It was a mark. It was the ghost of a future that he himself destroyed. He tried to look for her. He used contacts, hired discreet. Investigators searched through records, but she had disappeared from the map. No trace, no address, no trace. It was as if she had evaporated, and the more he searched, the more he realized she did not want to be found. And perhaps that would be the greatest punishment, because there are mistakes that hurt, and there are mistakes that become eternal echoes within those who commit them. It was on a grey autumn morning, when dry leaves covered the city sidewalks and the air carried that silent chill of the end of a cycle, that he saw her. Or rather, he saw someone who looked like her. She was crossing the street in a hurry, holding a leather briefcase and a coffee, with her hair tied up in a simple style, the same one she used when she cleaned the steps of the mansion. For a moment the world stopped. Benjamin stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, his gaze fixed, his heart beating like it hadn't in years. It was her. There was no doubt about it. Older, yes, more upright, with a new and sober elegance, far from that girl who had once waited for him behind the laundry room. He followed her, unsure of how to move. With every step, memory slapped the present. She entered a small cultural center in the eastern part of the city, where a conference on public education was taking place. The name was on the sign above the door, Amelia Ruiz, coordinator of the Books for the Future project. He read it once, twice. Amelia. There was no last name. She had erased it as if she were tearing the past out with her own hands. He stood outside, watching through the high windows as she lectured. Her voice, even from a distance, was still the same, steady, sweet, confident. She spoke about invisible young people, about opportunities that change stories, about the power of reading in forgotten favelas. There was a new light in her, not the hope of someone who expects something from someone else, but the strength of someone who has rebuilt their own history with their own hands. Late in the afternoon, he plucked up the courage. He entered the nearly empty auditorium just as everyone was leaving. She was organizing papers, alone, just like in the past, always after everyone had left. He called her name, not knowing how it would sound after so long. "Amelia?" She turned slowly, her eyes finding him like calm blades. There was no surprise, no pain, just a cold recognition, like someone seeing something that no longer burns. She smiled slightly, a smile that didn't open doors, it just confirmed her presence. He tried to speak. He had rehearsed entire sentences in his mind for years, but nothing went as planned. He simply said, "Are you okay?" And she responded, in the same tone she would use with any stranger, "Very. And you?" There was no anger. There was no explicit hurt, only absence. And that was the greatest answer. They talked for a few minutes, he trying to touch on the past with soft words, she responding politely. They didn't mention the mansion, or the wedding day, or the hidden notes. It was as if none of that had ever existed, or as if it had died with the girl who had waited alone that day. When she said goodbye, it was with a light wave and firm steps. He watched her leave through the glass door, as if she left no trace, and he remained there, sitting, surrounded by empty chairs and memories that no longer knew where to live. It was in that moment that he understood. She hadn't just moved on, she had won, all by herself, without having to prove anything to anyone. After that brief encounter in the auditorium, Benjamin tried to keep his distance, as if he wanted to respect the silence she had created around her own story. But the past does not allow itself to be silenced when it is demanded by destiny. Days later, he received an unexpected invitation from one of the construction company's board members, a charity event organized in partnership with the city's new Community Reading Institute. He didn't pay attention to the details until he arrived at the hall. When he read the banner above the stage, his blood ran cold. Amelia Ruiz Foundation, for a new generation of readers. She was there, at the center of everything. And this time, not as if she were invisible. She was wearing a light, discreet outfit, with a flower brooch that he himself had given her years before, hidden inside a book. The entire room looked at her with respect. The businessman, the politicians, the artists of the city, they all wanted photos. With her. They didn't know her past. They only saw the strong, determined woman admired for her social actions, but he saw everything. He saw the girl in the kitchen, the girl on the stairs, the maid of the mansion that he once believed too much in. The blow was silent, but devastating. There she was, being honored by the same people who had never even noticed her before. Now they spoke of her as an inspiration, as an example of overcoming obstacles and intelligence. He watched it all from the back of the room, standing, not knowing where to put his hands. With each round of applause, he felt a little bit of himself disappear. During the cocktail party, she tried to get closer. The crowd around her was large, and everyone surrounded her with genuine admiration. When they finally met eyes, she greeted him with a calm wave, as if he were just one of many. He approached slowly, extended his hand, and she shook it out of politeness. Her gaze was calm, tranquil, without glare, without rancor, and that hurt more than any anger she could have shown. He tried to make conversation. "You've done something really beautiful." She thanked him with a slight smile and turned to another guest. That was all. No harsh words, no demands, no tears. Just a firm, cutting, unreachable silence. And then he understood. She had already said everything she needed to by saying nothing more. The humiliation that had once been hers, waiting for a message that never came, was now his. Watching the love she had lost become untouchable. She no longer needed to prove herself. She had already proven herself to the entire world, and most of all, to herself. He, in turn, stood there as she walked away once more. But now, surrounded by lights, by respect, by a proper name built with dignity. And he, the rich man who had once promised to take her away, was now just another face lost in the crowd. He drove home that night in silence. The car seemed bigger, the road longer, and the world outside continued to spin as if nothing had happened. But inside him everything had changed. For the first time in years, Benjamin no longer carried the guilt as pain, but as awareness. He knew there was no going back, and perhaps he didn't even deserve it. He sat down at the piano in the mansion and tried to play something. His fingers, trembling, wouldn't obey. The usual wrong note sounded, like a painful reminder that there are songs that are only complete with the right presence. And she would never be there again. In the following days, he read about her in all the newspapers. Amelia Ruiz, founder, speaker, former resident of the outskirts of the city, who had revolutionized access to reading in the city's public schools. No mention of the past, not a single comma about the mansion, not even a discreet reference to the history they had lived. She had erased it, with the delicacy of someone who does not harbor hatred, but simply decides not to carry what does not deserve a place in her. Luggage. He started donating. He quietly sponsored her projects, without revealing his name. Discreet transfers, signed by a fake foundation. He wanted to help, but not be noticed. It was the only way he knew how to, perhaps, touch her world once again, without hurting her. At one of these events, she received an award for social impact, and when she thanked him, she told a short story about when she was young and cleaned stairs, but read in secret during her breaks. She said that one day, someone left her a book. That was it, a book. And that changed her life. He watched the scene on television. She didn't name names. She didn't seek recognition. But he knew. He knew that, even in the midst of so much pain, she had chosen to turn it all into something good. And that was the biggest turnaround of all, because the woman he had silently abandoned didn't scream, didn't expose, didn't destroy. She built. And she did it without needing revenge. She did it without needing him. And yet she taught him more than any expensive university ever could. Years later, a young reporter did a special on Amelia's story. He looked for old photos, investigated records, and cross-referenced data. He discovered that for 2 years she had worked in silence at the Thornton mansion. He also discovered that during this period, Benjamin had disappeared from public life for a while, after a series of unexplained absences. Speculations arose, of course, but she never confirmed anything. And, when asked directly, she simply answered, "The people who pass through our lives teach us even when they leave us." And she smiled, a smile so serene that it made the question lose its meaning. The article went viral, and even without direct mention, everyone connected the dots. Comments spread. Some praised her for her elegance, others criticized her for her cowardice, but she remained unshaken. She continued with her projects, events, and books. She never fueled the scandal. She never sought justice, because her justice had already happened, in the eyes of every child who now read it. In the applause she never received before, in the respect she was previously denied. Benjamin watched everything from afar. One night, he passed in front of a popular bookstore where there was a huge mural with the phrase, "When no one saw me, I wrote my own story. Amelia Ruiz." He stopped the car. He got out. He stood in front of the image for minutes, and he cried. It wasn't a cry of desperate regret. It was a silent, lonely cry of someone who knows they no longer fit into someone's story, but still they're grateful for having been part of it, even as the mistake that inspired a greater force. And that night, back at the piano in the mansion, for the first time he managed to play the entire melody, completely. And he cried again, not because he missed her, but because he finally understood what he had lost. If this story touched your heart, click on I liked so that more people know this silent truth. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss any story that reveals what many prefer to hide. Leave us a comment. She won in silence. And now, watch the video that is appearing on the screen, because it will make you feel everything again.